Good morning, everybody. Welcome to what is going to be an interesting presentation. And I'm either going to upset some people or I'm going to upset a lot of people. There's no kind of middle ground as far as this is concerned. I'm going to be talking about the impact that the current legal situation has in South Africa on the South African hacker/cybersecurity community, but I'm also going to talk about some of the things that are potentially coming down the future as well that are a little bit scary in terms of what we've got to deal with. So the Latin term, because you can't talk law without Latin, is Ignorantia, Juris, non excusat, which basically means ignorance of the law is no excuse. Now, as a former cop, that's kind of an important thing. But I also don't want you to see me as a former cop that wants to spoil everybody's fun. I'm just going to give you some reality checks about how the world works, the kind of impact that it can have on, and now my clicky decides it doesn't want to work. Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm Jason Jordan. Okay, the geeks in the room should get that one. I've been doing forensics for a long time. I'm a massive nerd, like a huge geek. Yeah, I suppose I'm one of the OG kind of digital forensic guys here in South Africa, which makes me feel like a really old fart. But yeah, it's fun. I love what I do. I love catching bad guys. I love going to court. Love testifying. And I've kind of fit into this world in kind of an interesting way. Yes, while I have been in law enforcement for most of my career, yes, why I do digital forensics work. I started from an IT perspective. In fact, Bevan, who's sitting over there, kind of we were in the same standard together at school. We kind of gave through the same thing, you know, the early ZX Spectrums and Commodore 64s and VIC-20s and so on and so on and so on. That's how we kind of got into our computers. I'm glad to see that some of our age demographic is represented here by that statement. But effectively, you know, when I was learning computers, we kind of learned by breaking things. We learned by hacking. That's how we did it. You know, back in those days, that was the norm. So when I have these discussions, I don't want you guys just to look at me as like, oh yeah, there's that Jason guy. He's, you know, like a forensic guy, and he's all about law and screwing it up for all of us and making our lives difficult. I want to really just look at the reality of the situation and how to improve things. So this talk actually has its inspiration, ironically, from this year's B-Sides in Joburg. So Charlie and I were in Joburg. We were sitting catching up. You know, always good catching up with my friends. And this is the nice thing about B-Sides. I get to hang out with my friends. And there was a young guy that gave a brilliant talk, absolutely brilliant talk. But effectively, he stood up on the podium and confessed to a crime. And inside my brain, I'm going, shut the F up, shut the F up, shut the F up. Like you're just making a confession on video effectively to breaking the law. Now, obviously the guy that gave the presentation, that wasn't his intention. He wanted to do reasonable disclosure. But the reality was, it was like, holy crap, this is actually kind of bad. So I stewed on this around because, you know, the last thing I want is for people in our community to inadvertently fall afoul of the law for doing kind of what comes naturally to us. Then, how many of you guys are on the InfoSec WhatsApp group? Okay, a couple of you. Okay, awesome. So you should recognize the logo from the group. We were having a chat. Somebody raised something on the InfoSec WhatsApp group about lockpicking. Oh my word! If I do lockpicking, am I going to get into trouble with the law? Because in terms of the Private Security Industry Regulatory Act, I've got to be a license to do locksmithing. And kind of that had the discussion as well. So it was like, hey, okay, cool. Maybe this is something to talk about. So I put in the proposal for B-Sides in Cape Town, and it was accepted. And of course, I kind of fell over myself because it's the first time I've actually been accepted at B-Sides, which is pretty cool. But yeah, it was really, you know, that was the genesis of this talk, of looking at some of the legal issues and how do we actually address these as a security community? How do we do what we love? How do we do what makes the world a better place without inadvertently falling afoul of the law. So I'm going to talk about a lot of legal practical scenarios we're going to find ourselves in. Now, first disclaimer, I am not a lawyer. That's probably a good thing. I'm not a lawyer, but I have studied law extensively. So I've studied law up until master's level. I've done criminal law at master's level. I've done law of evidence at master's level. For my sins, I helped contribute to the Cybercrime Act in South Africa. The parts that you don't like, I'm just going to say somebody else on the project team did those. Any ones you do like, I'll just claim ownership of those because I'm kind of egotistical like that. No, I'm not really. But that process was kind of important because the Deputy Minister of Justice actually brought people from the security community in to help craft that legislation. I've also written a couple of legal textbooks on information security law. So even though I'm not a lawyer, I think I have a fairly good grasp of the legal concepts which affect us at a practical level. So I want to just start opening up with a bit of a story, and I want you to think about the consequence, the concept. You sitting in your lounge by yourself, watching, I don't know, you're watching the latest episode of Skeleton Crew. And so everybody's watched the first episode, don't spoil it for me yet. I haven't watched it because I'm a big Star Wars nerd. But you're watching your favorite Disney program on Disney Plus, your favorite Star Wars program, or whatever floats your boat. And it's late at night, and suddenly you hear something wriggling on outside window, something like somebody's trying to open a window. And you don't hear it once, you hear it a few times at different windows. And suddenly you see the door, the door handle on your front door starting to move. So now we're in South Africa, right? If that happens to us, what's our first reaction? I'll tell you what my first reaction is. I'm racking a frigging round into my Glock, and I'm ready to shoot somebody through the door. Like, that's what I'm ready to do. So imagine, I'm like, okay, no, I'm going to be a bit more cautious. I'm not going to do the Oscar Pistorius thing, because apparently you get into cuck if you do things like shooting people through doors. So I kind of withdraw. I find a nice defensible position, and suddenly the door opens. I hear a lock being picked, and the door opens, and in walks somebody. And the moment that person walks into my house, you know what? I'm like, cheers, Bubby. Done. One single round. I carry hydro shock, so I know one single round is going to do it. And that's it. End of story. Now, take the physical out of it and look at the digital. How often do we in the security community, for lack of a better term, independently test systems? Without permission, but we independently test systems. Now again, the reason I put that out and I started with a physical analogy is that in the physical world, if somebody decides they want to test my home security without my permission, and they somehow get into my house, I'm going to shoot them dead. Okay, I know that sounds very dramatic, but we are here in South Africa. It's like I'm not just going to throw dirty words at them and things like that. I'm going to try and defend my home. But in the cyber world, we kind of do that a lot without even thinking about the ramifications. Now let's just say worst case scenario, I'm a cuck shot, okay? But I'm actually not a cuck shot. But let's just imagine I was a cuck shot, and I shoot the guy, and instead of killing him, I wound him, and he goes to hospital, and I charge him for housebreaking. And his defense when he goes to court is, but your worship, I didn't actually intend to break in the house and steal anything. I was just testing the security. Did you have permission to test the security? Why would I need permission to test the security? I test security in lots of houses around the neighborhood. the judge is going to laugh at you. He's going to throw you into a deep, dark hole, and you may start questioning your sexuality after said process. But the reality is that's kind of how it works in the physical world. So when we look at the cyber world, what is the impact? What's the difference that takes place here? So I want to talk about this concept of the road to hell being paved with good intentions. Yes, it is paved with good intentions, but also bad intentions. Now, again, as a youngster, I did what nowadays would actually be criminal. There wasn't a law that I broke back in the day, and I'm pretty sure most of us of my generation have done that. But if we did it today, it would be constituted as a criminal offense. Now, why did we do it? I didn't break into systems as a kid because I was malicious. I was curious. I wanted to see how the world worked. I wanted to figure things out, this brave new frontier that would allow me to essentially, I don't know, just explore. The whole concept of the hacker ethic, I kind of grew up with that whole concept, which is probably ironically why forensics fits so well for me, because in forensics we break stuff a lot of times to figure out how they work. But how many people in the security community do what we do out of curiosity? Not out of malice, not out of intention that we want to deliberately break into something, but we're curious. Curiosity is a good trait. It's a good trait for a hacker. It's a good trait for a pen tester. It's a good trait for a forensic investigator. It's a good trait for a cybersecurity professional. But we have to understand that sometimes our own curiosity can get us into trouble. The concept of curiosity killed the cat. Curiosity can also kill the hacker. Curiosity can also kill the security feature. Not physically. I mean, it's not like some network that I've hacked into is going to send up Hitman to come and take me out. Unless maybe I hit North Korea or something, which is a different scenario. I mean, there are certain countries in the world I'm not allowed to actually travel to because of stuff. But this is just how the world works. So we often do things out of curiosity. Here's another thing that we often do. And I think this is a lot of us that are in the security space do this. We do things based on the concept of the greater good. In other words, we actually believe in trying to make the world a better place, a more secure place, a place that effectively we would like to see our children grow up into, in a much more secure environment. So we end up using our skills for good. And again, you see this quite often where a person will effectively hack into a network, independently testing the network, and then do a responsible disclosure to the owner of that network to say, yeah, these are the vulnerabilities that we identified. I mean, that's a good thing. But it's still technically problematic in terms of how you go about it. Because what if you do this free security work and the owner says, screw you, I'm going to the police? Then what? So we do things for the greater good. Okay, then we have the cowboys. I don't know, at some point in my career, I think I was one of these cowboys where I didn't think the rules actually applied to me. I was like this rogue gunslinger, like I had my code. I had a code of ethics, but my code of ethics didn't necessarily align with the rules of the country. And again, a lot of people in the security industry are like this. Most of us are very independent thinkers. We don't like to be told what to do. I mean, don't tell me as a hacker what I can and can't do with software. I'm going to frigging figure this thing out myself and make it do my bidding. It's part of our mindset. It's part of our culture. But this can cause problems, especially when you have somebody that flaunts the rules a lot more than, say, somebody that's doing it for the greater good. But we do have a fourth category, and these are the guys I really have a problem with. And I'm very, very, very chuffed to see that there's lots of ladies in the room. So that's really, really awesome. So when I talk about guys, it's like the royal we. I know I should use the what's the pronoun these days? Them, they. That confuses the crap out of me. So I'm just going to go with the generic guys. And these are what I like to refer to as the bad apples. These are the people who essentially will hack into an environment, free security testing, but the purpose of that testing is, hey, I've seen how vulnerable your networks are, you should hire me to fix your problems. Or maybe you should pay me a service fee for what I've done. Or maybe you should hire my company to come and do this. Now, there are companies in South Africa that do just that. One day the law will catch up to them. And again, I know that's a horrible thing to just sit with, to leave a bit of a bitter taste in one's mouth, but it's people like this that actually make our industry somewhat less integral. Our ethics kind of get compromised and we all get tarred with the same brush. But all of these sort of motivations are not necessarily criminal. So in other words, all of the things that I've spoken about now is not somebody, a organized cybercrime group, attacking networks for the purpose of causing financial loss or stealing information or doing destructive cyber attacks like we're seeing in certain cyber warfare situations. It's all people who are doing security stuff without necessarily having a criminal intent. But we need to really have a grasp of what the legal situation is and talk about the criminal law. Now, when it comes to the criminal law in general, there's two concepts that we need to understand. One is the act unlawful? And unlawfulness basically means, does it violate a law? So if the law says, thou shalt hop on one left foot for 5 seconds every day, and I'm not going to try that because I'm clumsy and I'll fall over and break my neck. But if the law says that and you don't do it, technically you're breaking the law. Your actions become unlawful. Now, there are situations where unlawfulness can be eliminated. One of those is what we call consent. So if I'm engaged, okay, I'm not a pen tester, but if I'm engaged to do pen testing work and the client engages me to test their systems, they are consenting for me to actually do that work. When I do digital forensics and I do acquisitions and analysis, I'm doing that under consent. That permission has been provided to me. So even though my actions might technically violate a statute, they no longer are unlawful because I've actually made the actions lawful. There are a few others. Self-defense is one of them. Although please don't try use that argument with hacking back if somebody's currently hacking you, because attribution is still a problem as far as that's concerned. And you also don't want to be hacking back to countries like Russia, whose military doctrine says that they are allowed to respond to hack attacks with kinetic weapons. The last thing I want is some Russian MiG dropping a bomb on my frigging house because I've been hacking some Russian system back in self-defense. Although, if I go with what's happening in the Ukraine at the moment, Russia probably couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, so I think I'd probably be okay. So that is the issue of unlawfulness. The second issue that I have to deal with is something called intent. Now, I could say that as a cybersecurity researcher, when I access somebody's system, I didn't have the intent to commit a crime. Here's where the problem comes in. The issue around intent is not whether I intended to commit a crime. The issue is, did I intend to commit the acts that happened? So that is the big issue. If I had the intention to commit the act, I've satisfied the reason for intention. And this is why, ironically, and the issue is quite deep, but if you look at the Oscar Pistorius trial, that was the issue of intention. His argument was, well, I didn't really intend to I didn't intend to kill the person behind the door. And the court said, you had to anticipate that somebody would be behind the door, and if you shot them, they may die. That's something which we call conditio sine qua non. Okay, sorry. I'm a bit of a legal nerd as well, but it's basically the consequences of your actions. And that's one of those issues. My intention is determined subjectively by a court based on my actions, not what my actual intentions are in my head. So those are two things I want you to just bear in mind when we actually talk about the current criminal law situation in South Africa when it comes to security researchers. So a couple of years ago, South Africa passed the Cybercrimes Act, which I was involved in. Now, first things first, I want to give a huge shout out to the security community in South Africa. There were a lot of issues in this act that the State Security Agency tried to push through. And it was the security community in South Africa that actually stood up to this and said, no, we are not going to let this happen. And those sections were actually removed from the legislation. Even things around the wording of the offenses dealing with hacker tools and things, we forced the changes. So big thumbs up to the South African cybersecurity community. We played a role in making the act actually workable for us and for it to actually do its purpose of dealing with bad guys. But there are some sections in the Act that potentially we fall afoul of when we actually do our work. So one of the first ones, Section 2, is basically the act of unlawful access. If I gain access to a computer system unlawfully, that is a criminal offense. So in other words, the youngster who was talking at B-Sides in Joburg, who effectively got access to the SQL Server backend of this particular organization through a vulnerability, he actually committed the criminal offense. He didn't have permission. He had the intention of doing the action, even though he didn't have the intention to commit a crime, and this is what happened. Now, I want you to think about that for a point in time. He did the right thing. He did a responsible disclosure. The company didn't do anything about it. They ignored him. They basically left the vulnerability in place. But what if that company had been hard-assed? And again, we see this all around the world at the moment. The company says, hold on, you've come to us and said you've basically broken into our system. We didn't give you permission to do this. So now we're going to go to the authorities and have you prosecuted. The authorities have no choice but to prosecute. So I just want that to sink in for a moment. That guy did something, and again, for the greater good, but technically broke the law. So this is a challenge, and I've had a lot of people in the security community over the years in South Africa reach out to me and say, hey, Jason, we found a vulnerability in this system. How do I go and report it without actually basically letting people know that I've broken into their systems to find the vulnerability? And I've done a bit of a creative approach. Again, coming back to my law enforcement days, I will contact my friends in law enforcement and say, by the way, I have a source who told me about this thing. Because I'm kind of trusted in the community, so people are like, okay, Jason, we don't want you to expose your sources in the evil, dark hacker underground, because we're all evil, dark people, right? But we get away with it that way. But what if there's not a Jason to act as that shield between that person doing the disclosure and the authorities or the company concerned? Another offense, unlawful interception of data. So let's think of a scenario where, okay, not network traffic because that's a RICO violation, but effectively maybe I'm doing. I'm looking at data that's coming back. So in other words, a web server sends back a request using, let's just say, SOAP API or REST API, and I intercept that data because I now want to craft a reply to get back into that environment. That's interception of data. That's a criminal offense. Unlawful respect of a software or hardware tool. This is what I like to refer to as the hacking tools section, which we have effectively neutered. Basically, it comes down to the point of view is that if you are in possession of tools capable of committing a cyber crime, it's a criminal offense. But you have to possess it for the intention of committing the crime. Okay, this is a when we actually presented this section in Parliament before the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, and I had all these politicians sitting around the table, I basically went to each one of them that had their laptops out and said, so you guys say we should have this in its unaltered form, just mere possession of the tool is the offense. I'm like, okay, that's a Windows machine. What version of PowerShell are you running on? Let me just check. Okay, you got PowerShell version 3 back in those days. Okay, I can do A, B, C, D, E with PowerShell. That makes Windows a hacking tool. They're like, what the hell? And this was getting the rationale across, that they could finally see and understand that just normal computers could be used as hacking tools. Because again, they've grown up in this world where hacking has to rely on something evil being introduced into the system. The concept of living off the land, binaries, and that just completely escapes the politicians. But this is still an issue. Now, what this comes down to is that if, let's just say, the guy that inspired this talk, let's just say he had used, I know probably didn't, let's say he'd used Metasploit or Mimikatz or whatever, just pick your favorite, maybe used Cobalt Strike, who knows. If he was found in possession of that tool, technically it would be a violation of this act. Now, how can we defend ourselves against this? If you are engaged in legitimate security research, you can justify the possession of these tools. But then, how do we determine legitimate security research? Well, one of the first things, being part of this community helps with establishing your legitimacy. I mean, look, I'm here for the free coffee and the swag. It's a joke. I'm here for my friends. I'm here to learn. I'm here to share. I'm part of this community. And being part of this community helps with that kind of defense. Engage with things like OX Coffee up in Joburg, or B-Sides in Joburg, or the Hack South Discord channel. Grant has got the IC Squared Cape Town chapter up and running. Engage with that. Engage with the bodies that do security research. It helps you at least with that. So if you ever kind of fall afoul of that, at least you've got an explanation. But you shouldn't have the explanation after you've got caught and say, oh, by the way, I have these tools because I was doing legitimate security research. So what security research have you done? Oh, no, I've never actually done anything before. This is the first time. After I got caught? Probably not a good idea. Section 4 is basically unlawful interference with computer or a data program. Classic example here, buffer overflow attacks. I know they're not very popular these days. Hardly anybody teaches them. They're going to come back in fashion. Let's make peace with that. The moment I push extra code into that system, I'm interfering with the functionality of a program. If I do code injection to gain access, that is interfering with the program. I've effectively committed a criminal offense. If I interfere with computer data storage medium or computer system, if I start messing around with network settings, so say, for example, as part of my pen test, my free unauthorized pen test, I gain access to a system and I inadvertently delete data on a drive, I've committed that offense. The next one is a big one for us, especially in the security community. It's the unlawful acquisition, possession, provision, receipt, or use of a password, access code, or similar data or service. Now, luckily, the camera can't see all of you. The camera sees me. But how many of us are in possession of breach data containing passwords? No, we'd never do that, right? We would never do that. Technically, all of us are breaking the law. Technically. Again, the issue in this section, this is also something that we argued in Parliament, is that I need to be in possession of these things for the intention of using it to commit one of the other offenses. So the fact that I have password hash databases that I use as part of testing passwords when I'm doing a security audit, for example, that's okay because I have permission to effectively do that. So I'm not committing the offense. But if I'm just like, hey, I'm really curious about this thing, I'm just going to have all these passwords on my system, and you hear this tuk 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 knock on the door, usually followed by a boot door being kicked in, probably not the best scenario to then start coming up with excuses. Now, there's another criminal statute which does also impact on us from a security perspective. And this is in terms of the RICA legislation, the Regulation of Interception of Communication and Provision of Communication-Related Information Act. And this is probably one of the longest pieces of legislation names in South Africa. It's a mouthful, which is why they summarized it to RICA. But there is a section there, in section 49, that says any person who unlawfully intercepts any communication commits an offense. If I'm war driving and I'm identifying wireless access points, and I then start sniffing network traffic, I start sniffing packets in motion. Yes, I know we've got to deal with encryption and all those kind of things. But if I'm doing that, I'm intercepting communications. I've broken the law. Look, I regularly break the law when I'm bored sitting at airports around the world. Because, when you're stuck waiting 8-hour layover, you've got nothing better to do with your time. There's only so much Netflix you can watch in 8 hours before you get totally bored. But the simple reality is simple acts like that could potentially constitute a criminal offense. So these criminal offenses in terms of the Cybercrimes Act and the RICA legislation lead to criminal prosecutions. Okay, the companies involved or that are affected by the work we do could reach out to the authorities and say, hey, we're really upset that this guy or this girl actually got into our systems, and we want them prosecuted. And again, the authorities would have no choice but to do it. So the defense to that is twofold. One, you're either doing it as part of a professional engagement, so you make sure that you get permission, or look at companies that do have like a bug bounty program, responsible disclosure program. They have effectively tacitly given you permission to do certain things through that documentation. If you target an organization that doesn't have one of those two things in place, where they give consent or they do have a responsible disclosure or bug bounty program, the risk is on you. So just accept that is a risk you have to face. Now, the second thing that we have to worry about is not just the, going to prison and meeting Papa, because Papa wacht vir jou. We don't have to worry about that. We also have to worry about civil law, where somebody's actually going to sue us. They want to sue us into oblivion. And there's three basic issues that we could look at in civil law which would come down to this. One is delict. So in other words, delict is basically when I commit an unlawful act, a criminal act, but instead of going to the authorities to prosecute, I go to my lawyers and I sue and I claim damages. So I do a free security test on a company, and they turn around in legal papers and say, well, Jason's actions caused this and this and this, and we had to get external consultants in to come and resolve the issues, and suddenly we want to claim damages of 5 million rand. Huh? Like all I did was find that you had a vulnerability on your web server and put in some, extra code, and you didn't have proper validation on your inputs. 5 million rand, that seems a bit steep. But again, remember, you've got organizations that have the budgets to actually go after you. The concept in law is called a SLAP suit, strategic litigation against public participation. And unfortunately, I've been on the end of a SLAP suit myself, where organizations have actually tried to shut me up by trying to sue me. And it costs money to defend yourself. Even though you will be successful if you've done everything right, that is always a risk that you have on you. The second thing is defamation. Let's just say I go the whole responsible disclosure route. And the person that I'm doing the responsible disclosure for doesn't actually do anything about it. So I think, you know what, I'm going to do the ethical thing. I'm going to go to the media. I'm going to contact IT Web or something along those lines, and I'm going to talk to a journalist about this problem. and all of a sudden, firstly, I do something stupid. I actually get named in the journalist article. If you ever have to go talk to a journalist about something like that, do it under the condition of anonymity. That word. Do it under the condition of them not knowing who you are. Because if they know who you are, that company could turn around and sue you for defamation. Like, you have damaged my reputation, and as a result of this, I'm going to sue you. You know how often I see this litigation play out in the United States? Like, hugely. People, friends of mine who have done responsible disclosures, the companies have done nothing. They've gone to the media about it, and the companies have then sued them for hundreds of millions of dollars. They don't win the suit, invariably, but the person has to spend money to defend themselves. Because if you don't spend money to defend yourselves, a default judgment gets awarded against you. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So that is a problem. The other thing as well comes down to contractual things. How many people here actually read the end user license agreement of software that you use? Okay, at least I know everybody in the room is honest. Usually I have some bright horse that puts their hand up and says, "Oh, no, I do." It's like, you're a lying bastard. Because none of us read these things. But go and read the fine print on those things. There are clauses in there that if you try to reverse engineer software or find vulnerability in software that you actually have a license for, you are in breach of contract and they can sue you for it. Yeah. Mm. So in South African law, they're quite legal. Now, okay, I say quite legal. Technically, if you look at something like the Consumer Protection Act, which would actually govern, I mean, if I'm a company and I'm going to pick on a vendor. Okay, I'm gonna pick on Thingst, okay, because I know Haroon. Haroon is awesome. I've got nothing bad to say about Haroon. But let's just say I have a gripe with Thingst, and I decide like, oh, I'm gonna sue Thingst because I don't know, or Thingst decides they're gonna sue me for something. That contract, that end user license agreement, governs the thing. Now, technically, in terms of the Consumer Protection Act, you're supposed to explain the terms and conditions of a contract to a person. It never happens. Let's be honest. It never actually happens. But that in itself doesn't necessarily render the contract void, because there's a common law issue and there's a statutory law issue in civil contracts. So, for example, I could lodge a complaint with the consumer tribunal and I could go all that route, but that might not invalidate the contract. It might mean I can give the terms back. But the other provisions in the contract, like the thou shalt not reverse engineer the software, might fly. And we don't have any cases that have litigated that in South Africa. If you know, like I said, Thingst, Haroon's company, I've got so much respect for because of the work that they do. But in the grand scheme of things, as far as mega cybersecurity companies are concerned, they're not a CrowdStrike, or they're not a I'm trying to think of another big one. But anyway, I'll just go with CrowdStrike. Haroon is probably not going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to litigate against me. He probably doesn't have in-house teams of lawyers doing all the litigation. But if I did that to CrowdStrike, I guarantee you, I'm going to go need to have a proctologist exam to get rid of the lawyers that are sort of descending on me. So those are some of the issues that we need to deal with. The last thing I want to talk about before I talk about the future is regulatory law. There are laws in South Africa that potentially regulate cybersecurity. In the Private Security Industry Regulatory Authority Act, if you look at the definition of security, technically cybersecurity falls under it. Now, I don't know how many people of you are aware of this. It was about a year or two ago, PCERA actually did a research project where they are arguing that cybersecurity should be regulated by them. And that is the recommendation to Parliament. Now, that scares the crap out of me. To think that I'm going to be regulated by the same people that regulate the security guards that stand outside shopping malls. It scares me. It really does scare me. But for example, there's issues in PCERA which kind of would impact on us now, is the issue of lockpicking. So if I, as part of my pen test, am doing physical penetration testing work and I'm doing lockpicking, I technically need to be registered in terms of PCERA to do that. And if I offer that service as part of my pen test, I actually commit a crime. So that is kind of scary. So what does the future hold for us? And this is really what I mean. Hold on your hats. Things are about to get rough. Just when we thought it was safe to go back into the wilderness, the State Security Agency dusts off the cybersecurity part of the previous cybercrime and cybersecurity bill and is now trying to push it back through the process. The bill has not been made available to the public yet, technically. It's still technically a restricted document. Some of us who have been involved in the processes have had sight to this, and this bill scares me. Because one of the things that this bill does is going to actually regulate the cybersecurity industry in South Africa. In other words, if you want to provide cybersecurity services of any sort, you will have to register with a body to be set up by government. You will have to comply with the rules as set up by government. If you are a software security vendor, Haroon will have to go through this. They will have to register with the government for a license to be able to provide their software in South Africa, and if they don't do it, it becomes a criminal offense. This bull scares the living crap out of me. And the reason that I bring this up in this discussion is that while all of the things that I've spoken about now are realities that we have to deal with now, which we can actually address by having permission, having all the consents and things along those lines in place, this bill is going to require us as a community, when it comes out for public participation, to literally make a conscious decision whether this works for the country or not. I know that's kind of a downer to end the session on, but South Africa has a strong history of activism about unjust things that impede on our freedoms and our civil rights. This is one of these bills which has a good intention. I wouldn't say it's got bad intentions, but it is a bill that we need to, as a security community, have a serious look at, because I'm not so sure if I want some pencil pushing. Okay. That was a pure Freudian slip. But I'm not sure if I want some pencil pushing bureaucrat sitting in Pretoria determining what kind of training and skill set I need to have as a digital forensics practitioner. And that person might know nothing about the situation. I don't want some pencil pusher in Pretoria saying that if you want to be a pen tester in South Africa, the only acceptable route is to be a CEH. Sorry, that's I have an inside joke on that one. But these are the things we need to do. So that is me. That is my session. Thank you very, very much for everybody for attending. I don't know if we've got time for questions. No. Okay. So to save time, no questions. If anybody's got any questions, see me a little bit later on in the session. And thank you, everybody. Thanks for participating. There's all my contact details. Feel free to reach out to me. Anyway, have fun. Cool. Enjoy B-Sides, everybody.
Across the attack surface, scattered products and siloed views create blind spots that feel unstoppable. The deadliest risks are in these gaps, where attackers move in. It's time to unify fragmented snapshots into one all-seeing view of risk and unleash a platform born with one intention: isolate and eradicate your priority exposures. From IT infrastructure to cloud environments to critical infrastructure and everywhere in between. This is Tenable. Your exposure ends here.